The quiet man in the corner. It was a rainy Tuesday morning when Keanu Reeves walked into the motorcycle dealership he secretly co-owned. The sky outside was gray, and the streets glistened with wet reflections of neon lights. Inside, the dealership smelled like engine oil and fresh leather. Only a few people wandered the showroom, but none of them looked twice at the quiet man wearing a black hoodie, his face hidden by a low cap and a slight stubble that had grown over a few restless nights. Keanu didn't want attention today. He hadn't slept much, and his heart was heavy, though no one would guess why. It wasn't about fame. It wasn't about money. Something else weighed on his soul, something he hadn't spoken about in years. He wasn't here to be a star. He was here for a reason much more personal. In the far back of the showroom, beyond the rows of custom cruisers and electric bikes, stood an old model. It was a matte black motorcycle with subtle red accents. To anyone else, it looked like just another bike gathering dust. But for Keanu, it meant something more. It was the first bike he ever helped design. It reminded him of long nights in the garage, dreams too big for the world, and a friend who once believed in him before Hollywood ever did. That friend was gone now. As he stood there, quietly brushing his fingers along the seat, he heard footsteps behind him. Two young men, maybe in their 20s, walked in laughing. Their voices were loud and careless, echoing through the space like they owned it. They didn't notice Keanu at first. They were too busy showing off for each other, pointing at bikes. They couldn't afford, pretending to be someone they weren't. "Man, if I ever see that Keanu Reeves guy in real life," one of them said, smirking, "I'd ask him why he always acts so sad. Like, dude, you're rich. What's the problem?" The other laughed. "Yeah, always so serious, like he's better than everyone else." Keanu froze. Not because the words hurt him, they didn't. He had heard worse, but because the voices sounded familiar. Not the tone, but the attitude. Once, years ago, he had been just like them. Cocky. Lost. Trying to find meaning in a world that didn't seem to care. He could have turned around. He could have revealed who he was. But instead, he stayed silent, listening. The boys moved closer. One of them stopped near the old bike and frowned. "What's this old thing doing here? It looks like it belongs in a junkyard." Keanu's fingers tightened around the handlebar. For a second, the memory hit him so hard it almost knocked the breath out of him. That bike wasn't just metal and rubber. It was the last thing he had built with his late friend Liam, the man who had taught him everything about motorcycles, loyalty and living with honor. Liam had died in a crash testing a prototype, and this model had been shelved ever since. He stepped forward slowly, without saying a word. The boys still hadn't recognized him. Why would they? He didn't fit their image of a star. There were no cameras, no suits, no polished charm, just a tired man with pain in his eyes and grease under his nails. "This bike," Keanu said quietly, "was built by someone who gave his life for the things he believed in." The two young men looked at him, confused. Okay. Are you the mechanic or something?" Keanu didn't answer. He crouched beside the bike, his voice steady but soft. He used to say that every machine has a soul, but only if the person building it has one. "Who are you, man?" one of them asked, now slightly uneasy. Before Keanu could speak, a voice from the front called out, "Mr. Reeves, we didn't expect you today." Both boys spun around at once. The showroom manager walked in, holding a clipboard, clearly surprised. His eyes flicked between the boys and Keanu. One of them whispered, "Wait, that's..." But Keanu raised a hand. "Don't," he said. "It doesn't matter." The boys were frozen. The smugness drained from their faces. They looked at the man they had just mocked, now realizing who he was. Not a stranger. Not a mechanic. But the very man whose life they had laughed at. Yet Keanu didn't seem angry. There was no fire in his voice. Only something deeper. Something they couldn't name. "What matters," he said quietly, standing up, "is what you choose to see in others." If you only see the surface, you'll miss everything that matters." Silence fell over the room. The manager cleared his throat awkwardly, but Keanu ignored him. He looked at the old bike one more time, then at the boys. "I'll take it," he said. The manager blinked. "You want to buy the prototype?" "But sir, that model's not for sale. It's just on display." Keanu turned slowly. "Then I want you to take it off display. Give it back the road. It was never meant to gather dust." "Yes, sir. Absolutely." The boys still hadn't moved. One of them tried to say something, maybe an apology, maybe an excuse, but Keanu shook his head. "You don't need to explain. Just think about what you said, and why you said it." As Keanu walked toward the service desk to finalize the request, his phone buzzed in his pocket. The screen lit up with a name he hadn't seen in years, Liam's sister, Elena. His heart skipped. He hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. He stepped outside into the rain before answering. The wind was cold, but he didn't feel it. His thoughts were racing. "Keanu." Elena's voice cracked on the line. I need your help. It's about Liam, and something he left behind." Keanu didn't speak right away. The rain dripped off the brim of his cap as he stared out at the wet horizon. "What did he leave behind?" he asked softly. Her voice trembled. "A letter, and a son." Keanu's world tilted. He whispered, "A son." The line went silent for a moment. Then she said, "His name is Miles. He's 12. And he's missing." A boy named Miles. The rain hadn't stopped. It tapped gently against the windows of the black SUV as Keanu sat motionless in the parking lot, the engine idling low, his thoughts louder than the storm outside. The name echoed in his mind like a whisper from the past. Miles. The idea of Liam having a child, and never telling him, it didn't make sense. Yet in some strange way, it explained everything. The late-night phone calls Liam never took, the quick goodbyes, the distant look in his eyes when they talked about legacy. Keanu always thought Liam just lived in the moment, but now he saw it differently. Liam had been protecting something. Someone. He stared at the phone in his hand, still on the call with Elena. Her breathing was shaky on the other end, like someone who had held in a secret for far too long and finally let it out. "I was supposed to tell you after the funeral," she said, "but everything fell apart. Miles was too young to understand, and I didn't know how to reach you. You disappeared." Keanu closed his eyes for a moment. She wasn't wrong. After Liam died, he did disappear. From Hollywood, from people, from himself. Grief wasn't something he wore on the outside. It carved itself deep into him, quietly, where no one could see. And now, all that silence had cost him 12 years with a boy who might have called him uncle. "What happened?" he asked. "How? Did he go missing?" Elena's voice cracked. "He ran away 2 nights ago. We were arguing. He found the letter Liam wrote before the crash. It told the truth about you, about everything. He said he wanted to meet you, to see the man his father trusted more than anyone. I thought he was just angry. I didn't think he'd really leave." Keanu's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The pain in Elena's voice was raw and real. He could feel her regret bleeding through the phone, the kind that doesn't come from guilt but from love. The helpless kind of love that watches someone walk away and doesn't know how to bring them back. "Have you told the police?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "But they treat it like a runaway case. They don't see him the way I do. Miles is different. He's smart, but he doesn't trust easily. He's quiet, like Liam, and stubborn. If he's out there looking for you, he won't stop until he finds you." Keanu looked out at the city through the windshield, the blurred lights and moving shadows. Somewhere out there, in the wet, crowded streets, a 12-year-old boy was searching for a man he had never met. A boy whose father died riding beside him. A boy who believed in someone he had only heard stories about. "Text me your address," Keanu said. "I'm coming to you." The drive was long and silent. The dealership faded behind him, but his thoughts were louder now. He remembered when Liam first spoke about settling down, back when they were still building their dream of custom bikes and open highways. Liam never said her name, but Keanu saw the change in him, the quiet fire in his eyes, the way he talked about the future like it wasn't just metal and machines anymore. Back then, Keanu thought Liam was drifting. Now he understood. Liam had found something worth protecting. Someone. When he pulled into the quiet neighborhood where Elena lived, the streetlights flickered like tired guardians of the night. The house stood near the end of the road, simple and small, with a broken porch light and wind chimes that rattled softly in the breeze. Elena opened the door before he knocked. Her face was pale, eyes swollen from crying, but she managed a tired smile. "You haven't changed," she said. Keanu looked at her and saw the years that had passed, the weight she carried, the strength behind her sadness. "I have," he replied. "I just hide it better." They sat in the kitchen, lit by a single lamp. Photos lined the wall. Liam in the middle, smiling in old frames, Miles beside him. In some, a quiet boy with sharp eyes and a thoughtful face. Elena poured tea, her hands trembling. "I found his backpack hidden in the garage. He took cash, some granola bars, and a photo of you and Liam from the old shop. I think he's trying to find that place." Keanu nodded slowly. "I know where he might go." "You do?" She leaned forward, desperate. "If Liam ever told him about the shop, about our early days, there's one place he would go first. The old repair garage in Glendale. We used to call it the Cave. We lived there for a year while building our first bikes. It was our hideout. No one knew it like Liam did. Not even you." Hope flickered in her eyes. "Do you think he'd really go there? It's been closed for years." "Doesn't matter," Keanu said. "If it meant something to Liam, it'll mean something to Miles." Before she could reply, there was a knock at the door. Soft, hesitant, Elena rushed over, her breath catching. She flung it open, but it wasn't Miles. A stranger stood there. Wet jacket, nervous eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Sorry," he said. "Are you Elena? I think I found something." Keanu stepped forward, the man's words pulling him in like a current. "I work at a diner near the old bike shop," the man explained. "A kid came in late last night. Looked lost. Didn't say much, just stared at the old motorcycle hanging from the ceiling. Asked if I knew Keanu Reeves." Elena's knees buckled and she caught the doorframe. "Where is he now?" Keanu asked, his voice urgent. The man shook his head. "I offered him food. He said no. Left a few minutes later. But he dropped this." He held up a folded piece of paper. Keanu took it gently and opened it. There, written in a child's careful handwriting, were 4 words. "I'll find you. Uncle K." Keanu looked up, his heart pounding. He knew now. This wasn't just about finding Miles. It was about earning him, and Miles was already watching. Echoes in the alley, the city didn't sleep. Not really. Even when the sun dipped behind steel towers and the streets emptied of honking cars, there was always a hum, a low buzz of electricity, a whisper of distant voices, the silent shifting of shadows behind cracked windows and neon signs. Keanu Reeves walked those streets now, not as a celebrity, not as an actor, but as something simpler, someone searching for something he never knew he needed. His hands were in his coat pockets, his hood drawn low, and every step toward the old garage felt heavier than the last. He hadn't been back to the place in almost 15 years. It wasn't just a location. It was a memory, a ghost that lived in concrete and rust. The diner employee had given him the address, and Keanu recognized it before the man finished the sentence. He knew the neighborhood well. Back in the early days, before fame and fortune, before movie sets and red carpets, Keanu and Liam lived in that area like two kids chasing smoke. They worked on bikes all night, slept in sleeping bags behind a rusted workbench, and talked about what kind of men they hoped to become. Back then, the garage had been everything. Now it stood like a monument to what they lost. As he turned the corner, the old alley came into view. It was narrow, soaked in puddles with graffiti-stained walls and broken light fixtures buzzing overhead. The gate to the garage was half open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Keanu stopped for a moment, looking at it. He could almost see Liam leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, grinning like a fool. That image hit him hard. It wasn't nostalgia. It was ache. A deep ache that wrapped around the ribs and refused to let go. He stepped inside slowly. The garage was dark, lit only by the moon slipping through holes in the ceiling. The air was thick with dust and old engine oil. Some of their old tools still hung on the walls. The workbench was still there too, covered in cobwebs. And in the far corner, behind a tarp that fluttered with the breeze, was the frame of their very first motorcycle, unfinished, forgotten, but not untouched. Keanu's eyes narrowed. There were fresh footprints in the dust, small ones, and a chocolate bar wrapper lying on the floor. His breath caught in his throat. He knelt beside it, picking it up gently. It was warm, recently held. He scanned the room again, this time slower, more deliberate. "Miles," he said softly, his voice low, almost afraid to disturb the silence. "If you're here, you're safe. I'm not mad. I'm not gonna make you go home if you're not ready." No answer, only the sound of the wind slipping through cracks in the walls. He stood up and walked over to the old locker in the back. He remembered Liam used to keep snacks in there. They used to joke that it was the fridge, even though it was always too hot to store anything real. The lock was broken now. The door swung open with a creak. Inside, there was a small blanket, a flashlight, and a worn notebook. Keanu picked it up slowly. Flipping through the pages, drawings, sketches of motorcycles, notes in a child's hand, ideas for custom parts, engine tweaks, even a little page titled Bike Names. But it was the final page that made him stop cold. It wasn't a drawing. It was a list. "Things I want to ask Uncle K. Why did my dad trust you? What was he like before me? Why didn't you ever come visit? Do you miss him too? Would you teach me to ride?" Keanu sat down hard on the bench, the notebook trembling in his hands. He didn't know what to say, even to himself. Those questions cut deeper than any insult, deeper than grief. They were the words of a child searching for pieces of a father he never truly knew. And in those questions, Keanu saw himself, not the actor, not the businessman, but the boy who once needed someone and didn't know how to ask. Just then, something shifted behind the old shelves. A soft creak. A shadow moved. Keanu didn't turn right away. He didn't want to scare him. Instead, he spoke gently. "I used to think your dad was invincible, the strongest man I'd ever met. But you know what? The strongest thing he ever did was care about people. Even when it hurt, even when he was tired." The shadow paused, a quiet breath. "He never told me about you. I think he was afraid I'd disappear. But I think he also wanted me to find you someday, to answer those questions, and maybe to help you carry a little bit of him in a world that sometimes forgets the good ones." Finally, from behind the shelves, a face appeared, a small boy, skinny, pale, with messy dark hair and eyes too old for his age. He didn't speak, didn't cry. He just looked at Keanu like he was trying to figure out if the man in front of him was real. Keanu stood slowly and took a step forward. "Miles," he said. The boy's lip trembled. "You look like him," Keanu whispered. Miles stepped into the light, still silent, and held out something wrapped in cloth. Keanu took it gently and unwrapped it. It was Liam's old pocket knife, the one he never went anywhere without. Keanu stared at it, his throat tight. "He told me to give this to you," Miles said finally, his voice thin but steady. "In the letter." Keanu looked at him and nodded slowly, tears in his eyes that he didn't bother hiding. "Thank you," he said. Then he knelt down, looked the boy in the eye, and said the one thing he wished someone had said to him when he was 12 and lost. "You're not alone anymore." For the first time, Miles smiled. Just a little. But before Keanu could say more, a crash rang out from the front of the garage. Metal clattered. Someone had kicked the gate. Keanu stood up fast, motioning for Miles to stay back. A deep voice shouted from outside. "We know the kid's in there. Hand him over, old man!" Keanu's heart froze. He stepped into the moonlight, his hand still holding Liam's knife. And in the shadows outside, figures moved. 3 men, one of them holding a bat, and the look in their eyes told Keanu this wasn't about chance. They were looking for Miles, and they weren't here to talk. The boy, the blade, and the broken gate. The silence right after the threat felt heavier than the words themselves, like the entire garage was holding its breath. Keanu stood between the shadows and the child, body angled slightly, the old pocket knife, resting in his hand, not as a weapon, but as a reminder. His heart thudded against his chest like a warning bell, but his voice stayed calm, even quiet, as he called out through the broken entrance. "He's just a kid," he said. "You don't want to do this." From the darkness outside came a bitter laugh. It didn't belong to someone who had come here by accident. It was the kind of laugh that came from people who knew what they wanted and didn't care what they had to do to get it. "Save your voice, old man. We're not here for you." Keanu looked back at Miles, who hadn't moved an inch. The boy was crouched behind a metal shelf, his knees pulled up to his chest, his small hands gripping the edge of a workbench. But even in his fear, there was something steady in the way he watched. Liam's eyes, Liam's silence. The same quiet strength. Keanu had seen it before, in dusty roads and racing engines, in late-night builds and unspoken promises. Now it looked back at him through a scared boy in an abandoned garage. Keanu took a slow breath and turned back to the gate, stepping forward until he was barely 5 feet from the shadows. Then the first man stepped into view. Tall, wide-shouldered, with tattoos along his arms and eyes that didn't blink. Behind him were 2 more, lean, mean, twitchy. One held a crowbar, the other something worse. A phone, screen lit, recording. "Just give him up," the big one said. He ran away from something he shouldn't have. People are looking for him, people who'll pay. And that's when it hit Keanu. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just a group of thugs. They had been looking for Miles, and they weren't here to return him. They were here to take him. Keanu's voice dropped. "You're not cops, the car." Man smirked. "Never said we were." Behind them, a van idled on the street, its back doors cracked open. Keanu's jaw clenched. This wasn't a street scuffle. It was a planned snatch. And Miles had no idea how close he'd come to being taken again. "The boy's not going anywhere," Keanu said, steady as stone. The big man took a step forward. "Then maybe you leave us no choice." In that moment, everything slowed. Keanu didn't reach for violence. He didn't need to. What he reached for was something deeper, something older. Something that Liam had once said after a bar fight went too far, and they'd both walked away bruised but wiser. "If you ever stand between a child and danger," Liam told him, "you don't move until that child is safe. Even if it costs you." Those words moved through Keanu now like a current. He took another step forward and stood tall in the middle of the garage, arms slightly raised. Not threatening, not aggressive, just ready. "You think you can scare me?" The big man laughed. "You're what, an actor?" Keanu's eyes narrowed. "I'm someone who doesn't run. For a second they stared each other down. The air between them cracked with tension. And then the man lunged. But Keanu was faster. Not with fists, not with kicks, but with something no one expected. Sound. He slammed his boot into a loose metal oil drum beside him. The noise exploded through the garage like a gunshot, deafening, sharp, echoing. In the same second, he grabbed a heavy wrench from the workbench and hurled it toward the light switch. Darkness swallowed the space. Miles knew what to do. He ducked. Lower, crawled behind the shelves, and moved toward the side exit Keanu had shown him earlier. The escape tunnel. A narrow passage Liam had built during their early days in case the cops, or worse, ever came knocking. Keanu stayed in the darkness, breathing slow, footsteps soft. The men were loud, clumsy. They cursed and kicked things trying to find him. They didn't know the layout like he did. They didn't know every inch of this place. But Keanu did. He waited near the corner. When one of the men turned too fast, Keanu moved, grabbed his collar, slammed him against the metal wall, hard enough to drop the crowbar. But he didn't stay to fight. He just whispered, "You shouldn't have come here," and vanished back into the dark. Miles found the escape door. It was rusty, but it opened, with a push. Cold air rushed in. He slipped out and ran down the back alley, heart pounding, eyes scanning the night. He didn't know where to go, but he remembered the diner, the one from the night before. The man there had been kind. He headed that way, fast and low, legs aching but determined. Back inside, the men were panicking. "He's not here!" one of them shouted. "The kid's gone!" another yelled. Keanu stepped into the light again, just enough for them to see his silhouette. "You came for a child," he said. "But you found a wall," they charged. But before they could reach him, police sirens screamed outside. Blue and red lights flashed through the broken windows. Elena. She must have tracked his phone. Within seconds, the garage was flooded with cops. The men tried to run. They didn't make it far. Keanu stood still as the officers cuffed them, barely blinking, barely breathing. He watched them go down, not with satisfaction but with something colder. Resolve. Miles was safe. But this wasn't over. Outside, a breathless officer ran up. "We got a report. A kid just ran into a diner down the block. Says his name is Miles Reeves." Keanu's chest clenched. He pushed through the crowd and sprinted down the street past flashing lights and shouting voices. The rain had started again, light and steady. The diner glowed ahead. Windows steamed from the heat inside. He stepped through the door. Miles sat in a booth, soaked, shivering, eyes red but wide. Keanu didn't speak. He just knelt beside him and held out his hand. Miles took it, this time without fear. "You came for me," the boy whispered. Keanu nodded. "And I'll keep coming." But even as they sat there, holding on to a moment they'd both needed for so long, something deep in Keanu's mind stirred. The men at the garage hadn't just been thugs. They were looking for someone, and they knew Liam's name. There was a bigger story behind this, and Keanu had just stepped into it. Liam's second life. The diner lights flickered softly overhead, casting a warm yellow glow on the raindrops trailing down the window beside them. Outside, the storm was fading into mist, but inside, something heavier remained. Keanu sat across from Miles in the worn booth, the boy wrapped in a thick diner blanket, hands curled around a steaming cup of hot chocolate. He looked smaller than before, quieter, but not from fear. It was something else now. Trust. A quiet peace, fragile but forming, like a wire finally connecting to power. Neither of them spoke for a while. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was something sacred. Like they both understood that words were only needed when the heart had room to carry them. Keanu watched the boy sip slowly, his fingers still trembling just a little. Miles's eyes weren't darting around anymore. He wasn't watching the door. He was watching Keanu. After a long pause, the boy finally said, "They were looking for something, or someone. They said my name like they already knew it." Keanu nodded, gently pushing the pocketknife back across the table toward Miles. "And I think it's time we find out why." Miles stared down at the knife. It wasn't just metal anymore. It was a key, a piece of a larger story. Keanu pulled out the folded letter from his jacket, the one Elena had given him that morning. He hadn't read it yet. Somehow, it hadn't felt right until now. He opened it slowly, smoothing the page with his fingers. Liam's handwriting was still the same. Sharp, fast, slightly messy, like he always wrote with his heart racing. "If you're reading this, I'm probably gone. I hope it was fast. I hope you weren't there to see it. And if by some chance you're holding this, Keanu, it means I kept my promise. I kept Miles safe, at least for a while." Keanu's breath caught. He kept reading. "But there's something I never told you, something I buried deep. Not because I wanted to, but because it wasn't safe. Miles's birth certificate doesn't carry my name. That wasn't an accident. I did it to protect him. From people I used to work for." Keanu froze. Miles leaned in, eyes wide. "Before bikes, before the garage, before you. I worked for a group that wasn't on any map. Private security, off-the-books contracts. We handled things governments couldn't touch. Sometimes we guarded. Sometimes we retrieved, and sometimes we disappeared people. I left them when I realized what we were really doing. But no one leaves clean. They told me if I ever talked, they'd come for the ones I loved." Keanu lowered the letter slowly. "He never told me any of this," he whispered. Miles was pale. "Are they the ones who came for me?" Keanu nodded. "Maybe not them directly, but someone connected. Someone who knew Liam's past." He folded the letter again, mind racing. The garage ambush, the van, the threats. They hadn't been trying to harm Miles. They'd been trying to erase him, quietly, efficiently. And that only happened when someone believed you were a risk worth silencing. Keanu stood up. "We can't go back to Elena's. They'll check there." Miles looked up at him. "Where will we go?" Keanu thought for a moment, then reached into his pocket. He pulled out a worn keyring with a small metal tag. 44 Canyon Road. It was the address of a cabin Liam and Keanu used to escape to after long rides, deep in the hills, off-grid, untouched. "Whack. Go to the last place they'd ever look," Keanu said. "We go to where your dad taught me how to vanish." The drive was long. Winding mountain roads, trees bending low in the fog, headlights cutting through the thick night air. Miles slept curled up under a hoodie in the passenger seat, and Keanu kept one hand on the wheel and the other near his phone. He didn't trust the silence anymore. Too much had shifted. Too many shadows moved just outside the edges of the road. By the time they reached the cabin, dawn was just beginning to stretch across the sky, its light gentle and pale. The cabin sat like a memory frozen in wood and stone, untouched by time. The same green door, the same broken porch step. Keanu felt Liam everywhere. Inside, it smelled of cedar and dust. He lit a fire, pulled out blankets, and set water to boil. Miles wandered slowly through the place, touching things like they were relics from a museum, each item a piece of a father he never got to meet as a man. On the mantel sat a picture. Keanu and Liam, arms over each other's shoulders, dirt on their faces, grease on their clothes. Behind them, a bike engine hanging from chains, half assembled. Miles picked it up carefully. Was this the garage? Keanu smiled gently. That was the first day we finished a working engine. We didn't sleep for 2 days. Miles didn't smile. Not this time, he said. I wish he had told me more. Keanu sat beside him. He was trying to protect you. He didn't think he had the right to bring danger into your life. But he wanted you to find your own strength. And now you have. Miles looked down. But I'm still scared. Keanu put a hand on his shoulder. Being scared doesn't mean you're weak. It means you understand the stakes. Your dad used to say, bravery isn't doing something without fear. It's doing it anyway. Miles nodded, and for a moment, the room felt still again. But peace never lasted. Keanu's phone buzzed, a blocked number. No message, no voice, just a single photo. A picture of the motorcycle dealership. Its glass doors. Smashed. Spray paint across the wall. We found your footprints. Keanu's jaw clenched. They weren't chasing Miles anymore. They were chasing him, and they were getting closer. He looked at the boy. The firelight flickered across Miles's face. We have to move again, Keanu said. They're not done. Miles's voice was small, but clear. Where now? Keanu stood, his mind already working through the next step. To someone who might have answers, he said. An old friend of your dad's, someone he swore he'd never speak to again. Miles blinked. Why? Keanu opened the cabinet and pulled out a lockbox he hadn't touched in years. Inside, a phone, a name scratched on the back. Cassian Drake. And below that, in Liam's handwriting, do not trust him, unless you have no other choice. Keanu stared at the name, the memories coming back like thunder. He whispered, because sometimes the truth lives with the last person you want to see. The man in the mirror, the road to Cassian Drake was long, both in miles and memory. Keanu didn't speak much as he drove. The mountain air gave way to desert heat, the trees to sand, and all the while his mind circled back to one truth. This ending wasn't just about Miles. It was about Liam. It was about a promise he never made out loud, but had carried for years in silence. And now, that silence was cracking open. Cassian had once been Liam's partner. Not in business, not in dreams, but in the kind of work Liam never wanted to remember. The shadows, the missions, the things that got buried so deep they stopped feeling real. Until they knocked on your door. They arrived at an abandoned train station 2 hours past sunset. It sat like a forgotten relic in the desert, rusted tracks swallowed by sand. Keanu stepped out first, scanning the area, feeling the tension in his chest tighten like a wire pulling inward. Miles stayed close, his eyes sharper now, older than they were just days ago. Keanu looked at him and saw more than Liam's reflection. He saw strength carved from fear, hope rebuilt through choice. A figure stepped from the darkness, tall, lean, gray in the beard and hollow in the eyes. Cassian. He didn't smile, didn't greet. He simply said, I knew it would be you. Keanu stared. You were supposed to be dead, Cassian shrugged. People like me don't die. We disappear. There was a long silence between them, a silence full of past choices, betrayals, and things that couldn't be unsaid. Miles looked up at Keanu. Can we trust him? Keanu didn't answer. Cassian did. No, he said. But I owe Liam. And debt is the only currency I still respect. They stepped inside the station. It smelled like old smoke and metal. Maps were still pinned to the walls, torn and faded. Cassian poured 3 cups of black tea from a kettle that hissed like an old train engine. No sugar, no milk, no comfort, just the truth, coming in hot. They're called Section 4 now, Cassian said. Used to be something else. Doesn't matter. They bury their names the moment the heat gets too loud. Liam didn't just walk away. He stole something. Keanu raised his brow. What? Cassian leaned back, his eyes locked on Miles. Not what. Who? Keanu froze. Miles blinked. Me? Cassian nodded. You were born with a rare biometric signature. Something about your DNA sequence. I don't know the science. But I know the greed. They wanted you for a new program, an artificial combat predictor that needed human anchors. Liam found out, got you out, changed your name, erased you from their databases, and then he ran. Miles looked stunned. I'm not normal. Cassian shook his head slowly. You're more than normal. You're proof that some things can't be controlled, and that scares people with too much money and too little soul. Keanu stared at the floor. The pieces were falling into place now. The men at the garage, the van, the pressure to stay hidden. Liam hadn't been paranoid. He'd been hunted. They're still tracking us, Keanu said. Cassian pulled out a small metal device and placed it on the table. It blinked once, then again. Red. Red. Green. Not anymore, he said. I just killed your signal. But it won't last. Keanu took a breath, then stood. Then we make this the last move. Cassian frowned. What do you mean? Keanu looked at Miles. We end it. No more running, no more hiding. Cassian laughed bitterly. You think you can take down Section 4? Not with guns, Keanu said, but with light. Miles tilted his head. Light? Keanu nodded. Truth, exposure, everything they've done, everything Liam tried to stop. We show the world. Cassian looked skeptical. They'll erase you before your first sentence. Reaches the air. Keanu pulled out his phone. Not if the whole world is already watching. He opened the camera. He hit record. And he told the story. He told it all. About Liam, about the boy, about the garage, the night they were attacked, the letters, the truth buried in DNA, and the men who tried to steal a child to use as a machine. He spoke not as an actor, but as a friend, a brother, a protector. He didn't beg for sympathy. He spoke for justice. And then he handed the phone to Miles. Say whatever you want, he whispered. Miles stared at the lens. His small hands shook, but his voice didn't. My name is Miles, he said, and I'm not afraid of you. Keanu uploaded the video to every channel he had, social media, news contacts, forums that couldn't be traced. Within an hour, it was everywhere. Within 2 hours, the hashtags were trending. Justice for Liam should protect Miles. Truth rides, and by morning, everything changed. Section 4's files were leaked. Whistleblowers came forward, lawsuits filed. The men who attacked the garage were arrested again, this time by federal agents, and Keanu Reeves didn't vanish. He stood tall. He walked into press interviews, not as a celebrity, but as a man carrying another man's legacy. He told the world the truth, and the world listened. Weeks later, Keanu brought Miles back to the dealership. The glass was replaced, the bikes polished. The prototype, the one Liam had built, sat in the center, gleaming like a symbol of everything they'd survived. Miles stood beside it, helmet under his arm. You, ready? Keanu asked. Miles grinned. Teach me. Keanu smiled. Then he climbed on, and for the first time in a long time, they rode, not away from something, but toward everything that mattered.